I'm ready. So, welcome, say hello, let me know your name, where you're tuning in from. Um, Today's topic is colorism in families. I am super excited about that. Happy July 22nd. I am your host, Dr. Webb, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. And since the topic today is colorism in families, I also want you to, oh, yes, thank you. So, I am wearing uh, the logo today. Let me know what your roles are in your family. So, are you a mother, a father, daughter, sister, brother, cousin, auntie? Thank you. Sienna says, love the shirt and hair. Yay. Thank y'all for joining. So, we're going to get started in a bit while everyone comes in, takes a seat. The topic is colorism in family. So, I'm asking people how they identify in terms of their role in the family, right? So do you identify most strongly as the mother or the sibling or the daughter? So a couple of announcements while y'all are, hey, good to see you again. Yes. Hair by Arisi. Am I saying that correctly? You feel free to correct me if I say your screen name's wrong. Hey, Bobby, I'm glad you can join. Thank you. Yes, everybody's loving the shirt. So Jandel on Facebook says mother, daughter, sibling. Yes, and a great sibling at that. What's up, Sumlin? Hey, Valerie. Yay. Thank you for joining. So we are talking about colorism in families. But there are some really cool events coming up that I want to make everybody aware of. Tonight, actually, I have two more live events that I'm going to be partaking in. The next one is at 6 o'clock, so just under 2 hours away from now. They are a couple of doctors, not a couple, several doctors are doing a Pass the Mic campaign where non-black doctors are letting black doctors take over their Instagram accounts for a day. So it's called Pass the Mic Medical Edition. And so I'm going to be doing a live talk with a dermatologist, a black dermatologist named Dr. Adele. And we're going to be talking about beauty and colorism because as a black dermatologist, she does see a lot of clients who, are asking for skin lightening creams and thinking about where that desire comes from. I have to charge my phone. In people, right? Why is there a demand for skin bleaching and skin lightening? So that'll be tonight at 6 o'clock on Instagram. So sorry, Facebook folks, if you don't have an Instagram account. And then at 10:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, which is past my bedtime, but it's worth it. It's worth staying up a little bit later. I'm going to be on the Tammy Mack Late Show, which is airing on Fox Soul. So you can watch that online or on the Fox Soul app. And then one of my good old friends from my hometown of Baton Rouge, Michael Seaberry, is going to be one of the guest panelists on there with me as well. Don't forget that the 2020 Colorism Healing Anthology is for sale. I just got my shipment of copies. See that the light is kind of bright in the mail today. So y'all know shipping rates are much slower with the pandemic going on. So if you're an international author or an international fan or subscriber, it's going to take longer for you to get your books, but they are coming to you. And other people in the U.S. should be getting yours within the weeks now here. Be sure to visit colorismhealing.com. Again, if you want to show your support, you can grab a copy of the book. You can grab a t-shirt. I also have the I See Color and I Love It t-shirts. And then if you want to just drop a couple of dollars in Cash App or Venmo, I'm at Colorism Healing. All right? So again, today's topic for everyone who's just joining is colorism in families, right? And I've been asking people how they identify in their families. Hey, JB. So we have mother and grandmother. Bobby Jean Simmons sees herself primarily as a mother and grandmother. And then we had Jandel Crutchfield saying mother, daughter, and sibling, right? So for me, I am daughter and sibling first and foremost. And then in other contexts and situations, I am an aunt which is really, really fun. Any aunts and uncles in the house? And then also, of course, a cousin and a niece, right? So, in thinking about colorism in families, what I want to do is walk through some themes that I see or hear come up a lot when people are talking about their experiences with colorism, and then talk about some strategies for navigating the complex dynamics of colorism in families. And so, again, these are always interactive, and I love hearing your comments, your commentary, your testimonies, and getting your questions, right, and fielding your questions. Which reminds me that next week is all Q&A, all AMA, right? Which means you can ask me anything. That's what AMA means. And some people have already, sent in questions, but you can send them in a DM or a comment, or you can just come to the live and type them in the live chat, right? So next week is just all Q&A, no predefined topics. So a couple of things. I have 5 themes and then one sort of overarching comment that I want to make about the themes of colorism in families. And the first is that we know families of color, right, are often multicolored families. Through the process of colonization and mixing of the races in various regions in the Americas in particular, as part of the legacy of slavery, we have African Americans and Latinx people, and even in monoracial cultures like cultures or regions of the world like Asia, people of color span the gamut in terms of the rainbow of complexion and quantity of melanin in our skin, right? And so we have families, like even immediate families, that can be very varied in their complexions, right? And so that's why colorism is so obvious in many cases. And so if there is a family dynamic where people are more or less the same color, there might not be as much of an awareness about colorism in those families, right? So colorism is more obvious, or more overt, or more noticeable when the families have very diverse complexions and skin tones, right? And again, if anything I say is confusing, just leave a question mark and I'll repeat myself. And the second big thing is that we know that there are generational cycles when it comes to issues like colorism, right? And so what I mean by that is we have patterns of thinking and behaving that we pass down to future generations. And so we have elders in the family who grew up with sometimes internalized white supremacy or internalized anti-blackness, and so they pass on those values and those beliefs to the future generations, to their children, and they instill that in their grandchildren, right, in terms of how they rear the children. But then also our elders oftentimes are rearing children and from a place of their own trauma, right, their own personal trauma. And so that we see that play out in a variety of ways when it comes to colorism, because they experienced some form of racism or internalized racism that they never acknowledged and that they never healed, right? And so they then perpetuate it. And so again, the choice to call my work Colorism Healing is not by accident. Definitely from the beginning I've been saying that in order for us to not perpetuate colorism in the world, we have to first heal ourselves so that we can break the curse. So the third point is that preferential treatment, usually of the lighter skinned child or cousin or grandchild, can often create rifts between darker skinned siblings or children or cousins or grandchildren, right? The fourth thing I'll say is that both dark-skinned and light-skinned people, and children in particular, right, I think they are a significant focus when we're talking about colorism in families, can be the targets of abuse, but for different reasons, right? So again, it goes back to the specific trauma that the abuser faced in their upbringing, right, and in their past, and then we see that play out in terms of why the lighter skinned child might be the target of abuse in some families, versus in other families where the darker skinned child is a target of abuse. And when I say abuse, obviously, too, we know that abuse comes in many different forms. I was thinking about that in preparing for this live, but I also happened to see an Instagram post about it too. So, we know that it's not just the physical abuse. There's also sexual abuse, financial abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, forms of control and manipulation, right? And so we might have our own, again, unhealed trauma that causes us to abuse in ways that are not as visible or explicit, right? And so we have to be mindful of that and watchful of it for those in our families as well. And then the fifth theme that I see a lot play out in, stories that I've heard about people experiencing colorism in families is that, so the family dynamics sometimes are good and everyone's happy-go-lucky and we all love each other. And even if we are different skin tones, we never make a difference between ourselves. But people outside of the family, people who don't know us, people who don't have an understanding of how families of color can have a variety of melanin, they tend to differentiate, right? People who are outside of the family try to separate members of the family, right? And so a lot of people in the comments this week were saying that same story about how people didn't believe that they were really part of their family, or you must be adopted, or you must have a different dad, right? Or you can't be a biological descendant of this woman, right? Because she's dark and you're light, or vice versa, right? And so that for a lot of people has caused pain as well. And again, even if within the family everyone's treated equally and loved equally and affirmed and nurtured equally, it can still be hurtful when teachers or classmates or coaches or family friends make distinctions between the lighter skinned child or the darker skinned child, right? Jandelle Crutchfield says, exactly, they want to tell you like they know better than you what you are, right? Yeah, that's true. Like, so sometimes people feel pretty adamant and entitled to define you and label you and put you in a category, right? And I've been saying all week too, we all need basic biology lessons, right? I think everyone needs to go back and take their high school biology classes again and learn about things like recessive traits and, the quote unquote throwback genes, and just realizing too that you are drawing from two different bloodlines, right? You have two different parents. So, and then they have parents and they have parents. So there's a variety of ways that people can look even if they have the same two parents. And then the sixth thing, right, and so to wrap up the themes before we get to strategies, is that no one has the power to hurt you like your kin. And that is an NDI quote from her song, Get It Together. AJ Pumpkin says, I love your account. As a biracial girl with fully black siblings and other mixed siblings, your account has helped me to see how the world treats us differently. Yes, thank you for that honesty and transparency. Let's see. And so I think the NDI quote is speaking to the level of vulnerability that we have in families, right? The reason why no one has the power to hurt you like your kin is because the family dynamic makes us more vulnerable than other kinds of relationships. Even if, and I don't mean we are allowing ourselves to be vulnerable necessarily, but the mere nature of family makes you more vulnerable than, external relationships, especially parent-child or caregiver-child, whether it's the biological parent or not, whoever the caregiver is, that child is inherently vulnerable, right? In that situation, a child is inherently vulnerable to not only the physical demands that an adult might place on the child, but also the emotional conditioning, the social conditioning, right? The language, the presence of affirmation or lack of affirmation, or the outright bullying or targeting, right, of adults or older cousins and siblings, right? And so again, when we're talking about families, we have to, you know, place children at the center of that because they are just inherently the most vulnerable. And so I think that is why so much of the stories we hear about colorism start in the family. You know, there's a saying, it starts at home, and that's part of the reason why, is because the negative things that do happen related to colorism usually affect us at a moment when we are still developing. They affect us at moments when we're most sponge-like, are most susceptible to absorbing the feedback. And so that's why it's important to get it right within our families. That's why it's important for us to make sure we are doing our own work so that we can protect the children, protect the next generation, right? So before I get too deep into some strategies, I want to ask an overarching question. So some of you, like, let me get this screen name right, AJ Pumpkin, uh, shared their experience with being mixed race in a family that has other mixed race siblings, but also has fully black siblings. So my question is, what are some of your family dynamics that make your situation unique, right? Um, and not only that, but how have you been navigating that? How have you navigated that in the past for yourself, right? And this is just an overarching question. I know a lot of people need to take the questions with them and think about them over time. Uh, but also, have there been any breakthroughs? So I hear a lot of people ask me, well, you know, my mother is colorist because she favors my child because he's mixed race, right? So because my child is mixed race, my mother can't stop fawning over him, and I don't like that. And but she's my mom, and I don't know how to correct her. I don't know the respectable way to, you know, tell my mom to not be colorist to my children, you know? So, what are some of the specific situations that you all have in your families? And if you have tried different things, how have you done that? Vincent is just saying, oh my goodness, yes, hey June. um, Hassan Sharif TV says, are you a social worker? No, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a therapist or a social worker or a counselor. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but several people have asked me if I was that kind of a doctor. I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm not a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I have my PhD in English with the concentration in cultural studies. Hair by Aracy says, all of my family is literally dark skinned besides my mother, who passed. I have always been the outcast and constantly called white. So that's an interesting story. And I'm wondering if, um, so dark skin relative to your mother, or would you say just dark skin relative to the, I guess, the general society? And how do you feel about the fact that your mother passed? That's an interesting dynamic, right? For someone who, a family or a person who identifies as black, to have a mother who passes. And I don't, so also clarify for me if she can pass or if she actually did pass, because I don't want to make the assumption that she did if you're merely saying that she could pass for white. Hassan Sharif TV says, to me, I would be your work in the category of social work. Oh, okay. To me, I would put your work in the category of social work. Well, my sister, who I have had a lot of collaborations with, is a social worker. She teaches social work at the University of Texas at Arlington. She is several shades lighter than me, and so we've had an interesting story in terms of colorism. And so that's where what inspires our collaborations and our joint presentations. So I do have an affinity for social work. I have an affinity for that field, for that profession for sure. Jendelle says, my mother and I both have lighter skin than my siblings. I witnessed colorism against them as far back as I can remember. I think this pushed me to adopt a social justice approach and trying to help combat colorism in the world around us. Right. So I think Jendelle is reflecting on the desire to stand up for darker skinned siblings when they're being bullied or marginalized or ostracized. Kind of gave her a social justice orientation more generally, right? So defending, like seeing yourself as defending a cause, like of the people that you're related to, can kind of give you that lens for seeing the rest of the world as well, which is pretty cool. AJ Pumpkin says, my mom is black, so she never treated us differently. And I appreciate that she hasn't favored any of us. Yes, that makes a huge difference, AJ Pumpkin. She doesn't have a favorite child and makes sure none of us feel less than the other. That is so important, right? And I think that we have to consider ourselves fortunate and blessed and lucky when we have that parental support. Um, a lot of people, unfortunately, were first exposed to colorism via their mothers, especially girls, right? In a lot of instances, it's the mother who's giving them bleaching creams. It's the mother who's telling them to stay out of the sun, right? So I also was fortunate that my mother was not biased in that way. But a lot of the times I hear stories about young girls in particular, and guys actually, young guys and girls and non-binary folks as well, whose mothers sort of ingrained in them that they look prettier if they're lighter, right? Or they don't want to get too dark, right? Or they can't wear yellow if they're too brown. Let me make sure I'm keeping up with these comments. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that. It says, no, I'm saying she passed away. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. In a conversation on colorism, the word passed definitely has a certain connotation. So, again, my apologies and condolences. But I think, yeah, there's the issue what Hair by Aracy is saying of being the lightest person in the family and or being the darkest person in the family, right? So regardless of how dark you are on the larger social spectrum, right? Within a family, and I said this on my privileged live stream as well, like depending on whatever room you're in or whatever table you're sitting at, and again, whatever your nuclear family is like, you might be the lightest, you might be the darkest, right? And that difference can make you the target of alienation or make you the target of abuse. It can make you the target of ostracization, fetishization, and different things like that, right? So there are some people who look very light by most people's standards, but they are the darkest person in a family that is majority white passing, for example, right? Or you have people who are considered maybe a dark brown or a medium brown, but everyone else in their family is like a deep dark brown. And so they were considered the light one, you know? And I hear that a lot too when people say, well, yeah, you know, I'm light skinned, right? And then, you know, from my perception, they don't look light skinned, right? But it's because of the context that they were raised in that they saw themselves that way and that other people saw themselves that way. Hassan says, what made you want to work around race? Are we just one race? Then human race was created by the black woman. Civilization was created by black women. She said, gotcha, and it's okay. Thank you. Hey, Michelle. I will come back and answer that question, Hassan Sharif. But I want to read some of these comments from Facebook as well. So June says on Facebook, hey girl, hey, but I've had a few breakthroughs with my mama, but colorism is still very prevalent in my fam. As a brown-skinned person, my experience was so odd. I never experienced what my darker-skinned family members did, but I also experienced some variants of colorism from much lighter and ambiguously raced relatives. Hair texture was a big thing too. So I do my best to make sure my younger siblings, cousins, nieces, and nephews, etc., never experience that pain. Yes, June, and I think we can respond to pain by trying to inflict it on other people, right? Trying to not face it by externalizing the pain and therefore harming others. Or we can face our pain, do some healing, and try to save and protect the others in our family or the others in our presence, related or not, from having to feel that same kind of pain. And I think that is definitely the orientation we want to take. Stephanie Jackson on Facebook says, "You have opened my eyes so much, I had to correct my mom. She told my daughter that if she stayed out in the sun too long, she's going to get darker. Teachable moment for my mom. I told her she shouldn't comment about her color because she's going to grow up thinking that it's bad to get darker." Yes, absolutely. And that is a very, very common, one of the very common comments, right? In manifestations of colorism is stay out of the sun, don't get darker, right? Definitely in many, many families of color across the globe, right? Even think about the umbrellas and parasols that people use in other places. All right, let's see. There's a lot going on Instagram. I don't want to miss it. South Asian brown person here. Hey, Kinza. Elders in my family have a strong fascination and preference for light skin and light eyes. Yes, and I'm sure you noticed that fascination and preference at a very young age. Zinsiaf says, my mom is a few shades darker than me, and I watched her torture herself about her skin color and obsessive over mine and my lighter skinned daughter. Yes. So also, yeah, I've seen that too. I've heard those stories too, where sometimes a darker skinned person will sort of be obsessively admire, right, the lighter skinned child, or obsessively admire a lighter skinned relative. Let's see. It's a painful experience. It is the first question she asked me when I gave birth. What is the color of her skin? I asked her, will you love her any less? She said no, but repeated, what is her skin color? This is a tough question for me to tackle mentally, but how do you separate or draw the distinction between being colorist and simply having a preference choice for a partner? So let's see. CAD Jr. CAD Jr. 3. I can briefly touch on that, but I'll probably do a separate live on the whole preference thing in dating, right? So right now I'm kind of focused more so on colorism and nuclear and extended families, which also relates to dating preferences, but because that is a whole subtopic in and of itself, I kind of want to stay focused on the nuclear extended family dynamics. So Han Sharif says they have a question. I know your original question was how I got interested in race work, simply by being a black woman, a dark-skinned black woman with a big nose and 4C hair. That's the simplest way to say it. And I've always been curious, right? I don't remember a time when I wasn't thinking about the impact of my race and color on my life. Yes. Okay. So I think you had another question. You said, are albino people black? They just have less pigmentation. Yes. Albinism is a condition that black people and other people, anybody, even white people can have albinism, but yes. So a black person can have albinism, a white person can have albinism. It is just the lack of melanin production. All right. So I see a lot of good comments. Zinsiaf is saying it is so present in South Asian cultures like mine. We have to dismantle colonialism. True. That's for sure another topic. Thank you. All right. I think I got most of them. My apologies if I'm missing any of the questions or comments. Okay. So some strategies that I have, and for those of you who saw this post, I do have a blog post written up about it as well. So if you want to go back and read, it is called 8 Strategies for Dealing with Colorism and Families. And that is on the blog colorismhealing.com. So some of these strategies are very practical, and others are more, I guess, less tangible, but just as important. And so the first one is to be courageous, because there is a lot of fear, for example, when talking to a mother, right? And or even talking to a sibling, right, or a child about colorism. I have people asking me, what to say to their children, and not wanting to be wrong, or not uh, wanting to make someone angry. And because you are family, if you make someone angry, it's hard to just say, well, I'm never going to talk to you again, right? And so we have to walk a fine line in terms of dealing with the family in particular, because we are connected and tied. Um, but also, you're going to be the one who's, oh, we're just joking, you're being too serious, and why are you making this a big deal? And people are going to roll their eyes and say, oh, here she goes again, with this colorism stuff, right? So you have to be willing to be the party pooper sometimes. You have to be willing to be the one who is going to um, speak up when no one else seems to be, right? And that takes a lot of courage. The second important thing, going back to generational cycles of trauma, is to check yourself, right? A lot of it's painful to realize that you yourself have been biased. It's painful to realize um, that you have been complicit, or that you have perpetuated colorism, but it's never going to change if you are not willing to look at yourself, right? What are some of the things I've said? Maybe you were one of the people who told someone to stay out of the sun, right? And that's something we have to be honest with. And I recommend taking the Harvard implicit bias test. Again, if you have the courage to talk to someone, you can ask them. Have you felt mistreated by me? Have you felt ignored or left out by me? Right? How have I been in terms of treating you differently or not because of your skin tone? Zinsiaf says microaggressions are part of oppressing dark-skinned people. Yes, microaggressions can vary from, oh, you're pretty to be so dark, or a microaggression can be telling the light-skinned cousin that she's beautiful and then walking past the dark-skinned cousin without saying anything, right? We need to look at how we have internalized dominance as well as marginalization in our lives. Yes, 100%. And Janelle on Facebook says silence equals violence. So I'll bring up that point too. I'm skipping ahead, but cutting out the jokes, right? So somebody said something about a joke always has some truth. Yes. So Hair by Arisi says a joke always has some truth. And I always say people try to hide their disdain or their resentment inside of a joke. And that way, if you call them on and say, oh, I was just joking, it's just a joke, we're just having fun, lighten up, the whole plausible deniability is what they call it, right? Well, I don't really feel that way, it's just a joke. You're saying, because everyone around me has always been dark skinned, I've always seen the beauty of dark skinned people. That's excellent. Yes. And I think that's why it is important. So for parents or mentors to make sure that children are being exposed to a variety of people. Make sure that children are being exposed to people that don't just look like them, so that they can learn to appreciate the beauty in other skin tones, right? So yeah, cut the jokes. We're up against too big of a fight to let white supremacy and anti-blackness slip in under the guise of humor. Okay? We can't afford it because it's coming at us from everywhere. We really don't need it to be seeping into the cracks of our own families because somebody is trying to be witty or sarcastic. Hair by Reese said, I never played about light skin, dark skin jokes. Absolutely. Cut them out for both parties. That's right. So if it's a light skin joke, cut it. If it's a dark skin joke, cut it. Zinsiaf says, so when people tell me that it was not their intent, is to say, but the impact is still the same. So you need to take accountability for your joke. Absolutely. So even if it wasn't your intent, the impact is still the same. And we know we call white people out on this all the time for like, yeah, well, I didn't mean anything by it. That's cool that you didn't mean to offend people, but you did. So the other thing I'll say is know the perpetrators. So for yourself, if you are not one of the colorist people who has to unlearn the biases yourself, then it's important to also be aware of the people who are colorist for a couple of reasons. A, so you can prepare yourself when you're in their presence, right? You might have to emotionally ready yourself, right, to interact with this colorist family member. Another reason to know the perpetrators, especially if you're a parent, hey Karen, especially if you're a parent, is so that you can protect your children from that colorism, right? So if you know your a certain family member is colorist, maybe you don't call them to babysit. I'm just saying. I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to tell you not to get childcare when you need it. But if you have options, right? Choose the family members who are not colorists to spend the most time with your children, because that is. And as someone who was in daycare, right, not necessarily by family members, by non-family members, one of my most painful experiences with colorism came from a caregiver, a daycare person, right, who was evil, right? So be very, okay, said pause due to poor connection. Oh no, come back. So be very cautious about the family members that you allow to spend alone time with your kids if they're colorist. Some of more comments. If folks feel the need to explain a joke, then they need to check themselves. That's right. If people get it, then they get it. A good way to get people uncomfortable about their joke is to ask them to repeat it like 3 times. Pretend like you didn't get it. By trying to explain it, they'll make a fool of themselves. I'm gonna try that strategy. Yes, thank you. Say it. I'm a parent, and I will pass on colorist folks. That's right. Let's see. My sister-in-law has it bad. Calls me white because I talk white. Calls me white girl because I'm educated. Shaking my head. Yeah, and that's actually a form of, I think, a form of anti-blackness that says only white people can get educated, that only white people, like that's the world of white people, black people should not access things like books and college degrees, right? That is a form of anti-blackness and white supremacy. I remember we were taking some of our high school students on a field trip to a university, this local university, and we were walking through the student union. I said, well, look, you all, like when you get to college, studying is normal. I said, look at all these students, studying in the union. And then one of my African American students said, yeah, but they're all white. So I think that is very problematic. Not necessarily an issue of colorism directly, but still a form of internalized white supremacy, internalized anti-blackness that says, well, I'm black. I don't study. I don't learn. I don't have a desire for educating myself. June Vincent says, yes, being adopted by my maternal grandparents showed me that for sure. Works every time. Okay, 3 more things. Actually 4 more things. So let me speed it up, okay? Because Instagram does cut you off. Be aware of abuse or neglect. And so I mentioned earlier that children of any shade are susceptible to abuse. And so learn the signs of abuse. Again, realize that it's not just physical battery all the time. Abuse can be the way that a parent is talking to a child, right? Or, it's in one of the books that my therapist recommended for me, the author defined abuse as anything that's less than nurturing, anything that's less than loving, right? And so just be aware, right? Like if you do need to speak up more forcefully, right? Name calling, especially by the parents or the primary caregiver, can be particularly damaging, and that sort of thing. The 6th thing is to spread the love. Now, again, I use the example of showering admiration and praise on the lighter skinned cousins or grandchildren, and ignoring the darker skinned ones, walking right by them as if they don't exist, right? So make sure that when you're in your family gatherings, when you're at your family table, that if someone's praising one cousin, that you speak up and praise the other one, right? That you kind of help compensate and make sure everyone feels the love. So, number 7, be a mentor. So sometimes you need to work with your family members one-on-one, right? And that's good. Like that can actually strengthen family bonds to say, hey, I noticed you said this thing. Can I take you to lunch? Can you come by my house on Friday? And I can kind of explain to you why that's a problem. I can explain to you how what you said hurts the family, right? So sometimes it's not enough to just speak up in the moment and like call them out, but maybe they really could improve and change with like patience, you know what I mean, and with like a deeper conversation, and like a more of a show of connection and you know uh amiability. Hair by Race says some family used to call me Red. Yes. The expletive. um right, and that is hurtful and harmful, and again, the healing is necessary, because the only reason why we call people out of their names is because we are struggling with our own self-love. So for if anyone who's watching is still in that place, like please do your own work. It's not about the other person. And if you see it, if you see someone saying these things, if you see that happening too, right? We really, really gotta support and defend each other, right? Don't tolerate people calling somebody a name just because you don't feel like becoming the object of their wrath, right? Because if you say, hey, don't curse out that child, then they might start cursing you out. And so that's what keeps us silent so many times, right? Because we don't want to then become the target of that anger, right? Or that name calling. But you'll be surprised. Even if the perpetrator never changes their behavior, the impact that you speaking up could have on the child could make all the difference for that child, right? You may never change the mind of your aunt or your grandmother or your mother. But if that child sees that you, auntie or cousin or sister, stood up for me in that moment, you might actually save the child. And that's where the biggest focus, again, should always be, right? So in your instance, when people were calling you that, my hope is that someone would have stepped in and said, nah, call her by her name. She has a name. Thank you so much for your work. I hope you reach many people. The more people educated, the more the world can change. Absolutely. I have a two-part mission, and the first one is to raise critical awareness. Raise awareness. Just we all need to know, as many people need to know as possible. The last thing, in terms of strategy, is to be consistent. So the first time you speak up, people might be like, oh, she kind of, where are you coming from with that? Right? Like, oh, yeah, But I think the change is not going to happen overnight, especially if you're dealing with multiple people, right? Because it takes time just to change yourself. So it's hard to expect an entire family dynamic or a family culture to change overnight, right? So we have to be consistent about doing the work for ourselves, and we have to be consistent about not tolerating colorism from the people around us, okay? So it's 4:44. I do have my next live at 6 o'clock, so I gotta take a quick break, save my voice. The homework, though, is to share this video with someone in your family and ask them if they're open to having a discussion about colorism. So you choose the person based on whatever factors are important to you. You can send them this video or just anything, about colorism, and say, hey, I came across this online, and I'd really like to have a conversation with you about colorism, right? I think that is what the homework assignment I have for you now. And you can report back if you try it. Let me know how it goes in the DMs, or come back on the live next week and tell me how that conversation went, if you were able to have it. And then my affirmation to you related to colorism in families is that, if you repeat with me, I learn from my history, but I also transcend it. I think that's important, right? Because we all have our personal histories. I learn from history, meaning I learn from the trauma of my grandparents. I learn from the mistakes of my parents. I learn from my own mistakes as an individual. But I'm not bound to those mistakes. I can look at them and say, okay, here's where I can make an adjustment. Here's where I can make some tweaks so that my future and the future of anyone else that I touch can be different and can be better, right? So again, I'll say, I learn from history, but I'm able to transcend it. Whew. So clearly these are, abridged, condensed versions of these, talks and workshops. We could probably talk for 2 hours on this. But I think this is a good start, and I'm happy to revisit any topic again and do like a part 2 to talk more. Thank you all for being open and transparent and sharing your stories. I think you all also learn when I'm reading the comments, when you see each other's comments. You all definitely learn and get affirmed just as much from each other's comments as you do from hearing me talk at the screen. So I thank you all when you're leaving comments and asking questions, because you really are making this learning experience more robust for everyone. And I'll see you all at 10:30. Also on Friday, I'm doing another interview with Stephanie Brown of Creative Brown. She's a visual artist. She's also a writer, right? And so it'll be very fun. She was in one of my earlier writing contests, but she also had a lot of great artwork featured in the art exhibit I did in 2019. And she is the creator of Do Not Bleach. She has a campaign called Do Not Bleach. So I think that'll be really good on Friday as well. Just pay attention in the, social media feeds for anything else that's coming up, because I really have to be saying goodbye now. Although it's always hard to say goodbye. Dare I sing the song? Dare I sing it? Do y'all want to hear me sing? No, you don't. Okay, it's so hard to say goodbye. I'll just say that. But it's not too hard to say goodbye, because I know I can just come back next week. I know y'all are around, and I'll be seeing y'all around, okay? All right. Bye. Take care. Bye.